This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But first, I'll run through the markets we track on the program for you. So three of the bourses we track here, Egypt, Nigeria and the FTSE 100, were all essentially closed for the day. All three countries were observing public holidays of one form or another. The largest listed firm in Kenya, Safaricom, it does continue to remain in record territory. At the start of the week, Safaricom shares did close 0.37% higher. That takes its market cap to roughly $15 billion. At those levels, it accounts for just under two-thirds of the NSE's market cap. April did see the JSE's top 40 fall by just over a third. Today was no different. The index did close by at least 0.5% in the red. Here's what's coming up tonight. Bitcoin's domination of the cryptocurrency market value is declining as Ethereum climbs over 3,100. South Africa's power utilities facing off with unions over salary hikes. And the WTO and the US are starting talks on intellectual property issues that are stopping the much wider production of desperately needed COVID-19 vaccines. Our starting point tonight is a world of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin's domination of the total cryptocurrency market value is declining as its next largest rival, Ether, reaches the $3,000 milestone. In fact, earlier today it crossed well over 3,100. Now, the rise of Ether suggests there's a lot more room for more than just one winner among digital tokens as the sector evolves. Bitcoin now accounts for roughly 46% of total crypto market value, down from about 70% at the start of the year. Ether makes up 15%, according to the tracker CoinGecko. Now, Bitcoin does remain the largest single cryptocurrency, arguably the oldest one as well, but the momentum in other tokens is drawing a lot more interest too. Proponents do argue that investors are getting a lot more comfortable with a variety of tokens. Critics, however, contend that the sector may be just in the grip of a bit of a bubble. Cryptocurrencies were broadly higher on Monday. Bitcoin climbed above $58,000. Ether was at least 6% higher, $3,151 as of 8:17 a.m. in New York. All right, then, so let's explore this in more detail. Elena Casas is live in London tonight. So, Elena, Bitcoin has had a fair bit of institutional investors' money flowing into it. Tesla, of course, being arguably one of the most famous ones. But is Ether getting the same kind of capital allocation among institutional investors, and if so, why?
Well, of course, a lot of this is down to the wider institutional acceptance of crypto in general, with people like JP Morgan now planning a managed crypto fund, and the recent IPO of the cryptocurrency marketplace Coinbase, which was backed, of course, by some major venture capital funds. So crypto in general has become very mainstream, but that's also attracting attention to the fact that there are a range of currencies beyond Bitcoin. Analysts at JP Morgan say Ethereum will move past Bitcoin. That's partly due to improvements in its algorithm, which mean that many people think that it's more stable and more trustworthy than Bitcoin's. And it's also because it's increasingly being used to buy things like digital artworks in the form of NFTs, which grant people ownership on paper to an artwork or an image, which can usually still be viewed by everyone on the internet, but they are recently attracting huge prices. And in an unusual establishment vote of confidence, last week the European Investment Bank says it plans on issuing a digital bond over the Ethereum blockchain, which clearly means they believe in the reliability of that technology.
So Bitcoin, of course, as you mentioned, gets the bulk of the attention in the crypto market, but Ethereum's performance so far in 2021 is eclipsing Bitcoin by many ways. It's more than quadrupled from around $700 to over $3,100 in just 12 weeks. Why? Where's the attraction here?
Well, Bitcoin has had a particularly volatile 2021 for various reasons. Partly that's because many investors feel that at around $60,000 recently, it's wildly overvalued. There's also the concern that the US government could be set to regulate its use, especially with concerns it's being used by hackers and ransomware operators. And another concern is the worry that China might crack down on Bitcoin mining. A lot of that happens in places like Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia, where electricity is cheap, but it uses so much energy that local governments in those regions want to clamp down on it. So with all these problems against Bitcoin, if you like, they're all reasons for investors to explore cryptocurrency more widely and get into less high-profile currencies. And Ethereum seems to be attracting most of the attention now.
Indeed, a flight to safety in ether. There's a double dose of irony there, but let's skip that for a moment. A common counter-argument, of course, with the price hikes we're seeing now is that this is just a stimulus-fueled bubble, especially if you're in the US, and more so if you look at the rise of things like Dogecoin, which started as a joke. But what data is usually provided to back this up?
Well, the thing is, of course, that it's hard to gather any data on who's buying cryptocurrency and with what money, because for a lot of buyers, that's the whole attraction. It's all anonymised. And there's a reason why US regulators are worried about it being used by criminals. It's because, up to a point, it is. Having said that, though, lots of analysts believe that the explosion in crypto is down, as you say, to the vast amount of cheap money flowing around at the moment in the US financial system in particular, because of those stimulus checks that people there have received and because of all the monetary policy, because of the Fed ploughing cheap money into the markets. That's been held responsible for huge run-ups in low-value stocks like GameStop, which are often popular, of course, with the same kind of internet message boards where you also find cryptocurrency fans and things like Dogecoin, which, as you say, began as an internet joke. But it's also true that some very serious investors are putting serious amounts of money into cryptocurrency, and it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon.
Indeed, it'll be fun to see what the hodl gang, as they like to call themselves, will say after this conversation. Elena Casas in London, thank you. Now, on to Kenya. The government there has ordered the mobile operator Airtel to pay just over $20 million for its expired license to be exempted from a rule that requires telecoms operators in this country to sell a 30% stake to local investors. And this, according to the state, needs to happen within the next 3 years. John Musheru, the ICT Cabinet Secretary, says that Airtel must first renew its license, which expired back in February 2015, before getting into talks with the government for a waiver of that local ownership rule. Airtel Kenya is locked in a court stalemate with the Communications Authority of Kenya over the renewal of its operating license, with the regulator insisting that the firm must pay the permit fee in order to stay in business. In the meantime, Airtel is operating on a license acquired along with ESSA's assets in a deal concluded back in 2014. On to North Africa now. Egypt's largest single solar power plant has secured $114 million in funding from a consortium of lenders to develop the project. The development of the Kom Ombo solar power plant will add 200 megawatts of generation capacity, increasing the share as well of clean, green, renewable energy into Egypt's generation mix. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
With the financing deal in place, the project, which was delayed due to the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, will begin production in the third quarter of 2021. Experts say it's a unique private sector endeavor that will increase the share of renewable energy in the Egyptian power sector.
Other parks in Egypt are divided into small 50-megawatt solar projects by several companies. But for one individual company to establish a 200-megawatt power station, this is big. Another important aspect is that the future in renewables is not just solar energy, but solar energy using photovoltaic effects. It means to create solar energy using sunlight and not heat as was the case before. Light stays all day, but heat or temperature changes according to weather conditions. This project adapts to this updated system.
Saudi Arabia's Aqua Power, which is the company behind the project, says the plant's solar production will provide electricity to 130,000 households at the lowest rates in Africa. The project is backed by a host of lenders, such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the African Development Bank, and is seen as an important addition to Egypt's plans to transform into clean energy.
Egypt expects that in 2022, renewable energy will be 20% of its total energy output and 40% by 2030. This project will help in achieving that target. There is a study that shows if we make optimum use of the suitable areas in Egypt for clean energy, we can produce up to 90 gigawatts of electricity from renewable energy.
Egypt's total electricity output currently stands at around 58 gigawatts. The North African country's location makes it ideally positioned to tap into solar energy projects because of its sunny, warm weather year-round, especially in Upper Egypt, where the Komombo solar plant will be located. The Komombo project stands only a few kilometers next to another landmark, the Bimban Solar Park, the largest of its kind in Africa, producing 1.8 gigawatts of electricity. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
All right, then a quick run through some company news. This one from West Africa and East Africa to start with. The Nigerian lender Axis Bank has disclosed a $13.5 million investment in its Kenyan unit after a buyer from the late President Daniel Moi's allies last year. The investment came after Axis Bank Group acquired 99.98% of the then Transnational Bank in July last year at a total cash consideration of $13.8 million. Axis Bank Kenya is seeking expansion and new business lines. Still in Kenya, the chief executive officer of the fallen retail chain Nakumatt, Atul Shah, has lost a court bid to reverse the auction of his property worth $9.6 million over a multi-million-dollar loan that he guaranteed when the retail chain was still a going concern. Court of Appeal judges said it would be unfair to stop the transfer of the property given that the buyer, Furniture Palace International Limited, had not been enjoined in the case. Mr. Shah and his Cologne Investments entity had also not denied defaulting on debt provided by KCB. Tanzania is looking to seal a $30 billion liquefied natural gas project within 6 months. This comes after the country's president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, called for a resumption of negotiations that had stalled for more than a year. One of the developers, Equinor ASA, took a $982 million impairment on the project in January, which it said would be reversible after failing to settle terms with Tanzania's government. And finally, after months of hype and warring words, Epic Games is going to get its day in court with Apple today. The trial is starting on Monday. It's one of the most important in Apple's history. Apple boss Tim Cook will be giving evidence, the first time he's actually given testimony in a trial. At stake is the future of the App Store. The amount it charges developers, which is a wildly lucrative money spinner for the company, with that 30% that it charges in some cases. That's the run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's on the other side. South Africa's power utilities facing off with unions over salary hikes. We'll have an update. And in our new series, Surviving Climate Change, we'll take a closer look at how global warming is taking a bitter toll on the environment and your lives.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the programme. Let's head over to South Africa. The country's state power utility, Eskom, and its recognised unions are expected to square off for the latest round of wage negotiations this week between the 4th and the 6th of May. Workers' unions are demanding a 15% salary increase from the utility. And this is a firm, remember, that has a $32 billion debt pile. Eskom has not disclosed its position ahead of the talks, but CGTN's Angelo Coppola now reports it's urging all parties involved to put the country's interests first.
The utility has a debt burden of over 450 billion rand that it needs to service, and its current income doesn't cover the interest payments. It's also owed a substantial amount of arrears from at least 10 municipalities.
The whole country relies indeed on all of us, Eskom and the labor partners, together with the employees. With the whole economy is heavily reliant on all of us to pull together and swiftly and come to a solution or a settlement that caters for the best interests of everybody.
NUMSA, one of the main unions at the power utility, is in a fighting mood. It's demanding between a 10 and 15% increase for its members.
So the question we are going in with into these talks as NUMSA is that if coal companies are allowed to get an increase, an unjustified increase, and by the way, these coal companies, there's been absolutely no intervention in the escalation of costs and in the costs of diesel, then why shouldn't we demand 15% for our members?
The Eskom wage negotiations are always robust, and the last wage talks 3 years ago were characterized by union members picketing outside power stations and other protest action. These talks are set to be as tough because of the current financial situation.
Eskom on its own is not able to fully fund its interest payments and all its operating costs. That basically, therefore, shows you how empty the PT is.
As the parties prepare to start talks, negotiating positions have been taken.
So it would have to be a give and take. If you are going to say that as workers we must make compromises, you must also be prepared to make compromises. There are fundamental decisions that this management has failed to take, and we expect them to take those decisions if they expect us to make sacrifices.
For the country's economy to grow, it's important that Eskom is up and running and functional, and these wage negotiations have the potential to cause more load shedding. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's move over to East Africa now. Now, the closure of schools affected over 18 million children in Kenya, prompting the development of the emergency response plan. Now, the shutdown, of course, has further trimmed learning opportunities among young pupils and students in institutions of higher learning. And this, in turn, could have a direct impact in Kenya's employment market, at least in the short and perhaps even in the long term as well. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with that story.
2020 will stand out as the year that changed the education sector worldwide. COVID-19 disrupted the flow of education, halting traditional methods, paving way for online learning. The disruption exposed various gaps and inequalities that championed education without considering the importance of the quality of education.
Basically, education is supposed to enable someone achieve three things. One, be able to survive. Two, be able to thrive. And three, be able to live at peace with community and environment. So we go back and ask, has our education been doing that?
In Kenya, the number of students who sat for the national exams for the past 5 years indicate a clear flow of students from primary, secondary to university level of education. But the disparity lies in the number of students who are able to graduate from one level to the next.
Carrying a certificate from whatever university is not what will make that person valuable to society in terms of contributing to production and in terms of interacting properly with other people and the environment. It's not the certificate, it's the competencies that they get. And we need to create multi-levels of those competencies so that we have a labor market that functions.
Back in 2016, the number of students who sat for the national exams at the primary level recorded a strong decline from over 900,000 to just 600,000. Although the number of students able to achieve the mean grade for university enrollment had been steadily growing over the past 5-year gap from 88,929 to over 100,000, that's where the good news ends. Since 2016, over 450,000 students failed to advance to university, and now with a year-long gap in 2020 and a staggered relaunch to the academic calendar in 2021, what does this mean for Kenya's SDG benchmarks and Vision 2030 education goals?
It is going to have very lasting effect on the academics especially.
According to the World Bank, in a document published in January this year, approximately 1.6 billion children worldwide were out of school from the April 2020 curve. Currently, 700 million children still remain at home, with families having to navigate either blended or remote learning, and for many others, no learning at all. This gap in attendance has exposed social ills that could short-circuit the academic life of a child for good.
I don't think the job market has lost anything. It has a lot of idle manpower. A lot of people that were trained already and they are not employed. So 1 year of no one graduating does not in any way create shortages in the labor market.
The hospitality sector has been one of the hardest hit, with job losses following adopted restrictions.
Following the announcement in March of the first case in Kenya and the subsequent lockdown, after that we went into a phase now of just trying to preserve the business. So it was at that point that we really shrunk our workforce by I'd say by about 2/3. We had to let go about 2/3 of our staff.
The layoff forced employers to explore the capacity of employees.
Can people multitask? Can people be, so the employees who are multi-skilled are finding that they can survive a little better than the employee who says or feel or believes that I can only do this one thing. So I think that has been one of the biggest shifts.
And the biggest shift during COVID season was the strategy in the job market. Job security is only assured for those able to embrace agility to meet the required needs.
After school, you continue to learn, because today the labor market is changing very fast. The skills you get from college today, in 5 years, those skills are obsolete. You need to learn new skills in the labor market.
Analysts forecast hard times ahead in the job market, with 49 million more Africans at risk of extreme poverty due to loss of livelihoods, especially in the informal sector. And with graduates churned out annually, governments must rethink on policies and models for managing labor market shocks by providing effective protection in the short and long run. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
So as you've just heard there, for nearly 14 million children in primary and secondary level education in Kenya's education system, 2020 was largely a lost year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Schools that could continue the classes online did so, but arguably that was a minority. The pandemic, however, did offer an opportunity to tackle long lingering problems like crowded classrooms, outdated curricula, and a brutal schedule that often sees children on the road going to school, in some cases as early as 5 a.m. One such firm, Y Combinator-backed Kidato, recently closed its seed funding round. When I spoke to its founder, Sam Gishuru, a few hours ago, I started by asking him if the business would have taken off as fast as it did were there no pandemic.
I think it would have still been possible to build a business, but it would not have moved as fast as it has moved. The pandemic was more of a catalyst for it. And so the pandemic allowed us to see disorganization and chaos in the education system. And so before this, we had already started homeschooling, and we noticed that there was thousands of parents who have their kids as private students who actually spend time training their kids in East Africa. I mean, there's a whole community actually around Africa in homeschooling parents. And so there was already a need that a small niche market had shown of parents who want better quality education, spend more time with their kids, and all the other things that come together with just having an education that's very customized for every child.
How's the money side of it working out? Because I know you've raised $1.4 million in your latest seed funding round, but from the parents' perspective, what exactly do they pay? Is it a payment per lesson program? Are they paying, is in the conventional sense, or rather in the old sense, are they paying for fees up front per term? How are you billing them?
Well, we do have the after-school classes, so you can pay per lesson, although we are currently exploring the opportunity to do them as clubs. And so it's more subscription-based. We'll be going towards subscription-based before the end of the year, including one-off. We'll still have per lesson payments plus subscription-based just to see how parents prefer it. When it comes to the tutoring side of the academic side, you can pay monthly for tutoring, you can pay quarterly as the school term runs, or you can pay annually. So we give the parents that particular option to choose. And because most parents have been hard hit by COVID, we have a COVID scholarship as well. So we give 25%, 50% to parents who apply for it. Our cost in terms of tuition is 30 to 50% cheaper than almost any mid-level private school that is teaching an international curriculum.
Okay, what about the teacher supply side? Because COVID absolutely disrupted the education system in Kenya, as you well know. School systems are basically shut down for the better part of a year. And a lot of teachers essentially were not able to make a living at that point in time. But from your side in building out this platform, did you face any skepticism from teachers who are not really comfortable with this idea of teaching, or have they gotten used to the idea and they've gone into it 100%?
We're very particular about the teachers we hire. And yes, you're right. In Kenya alone, over 300 private schools shut down because of COVID. So we do have an oversupply of teachers. And our teachers are picked between, they must have a minimum of sort of 3 years experience teaching, and they shouldn't be more than 10 years experience teaching. The problem with teachers who are really super experienced in teaching in a traditional brick and mortar setting is that they try to replicate the same online, and it doesn't work. So we want people who have taught for about 7 years who can learn new ways of delivering content. One of the things we've learned from our students is that they learn a lot from YouTube, watching Minecraft videos, Roblox videos, and we want to replicate very similar exciting experiences on sciences and mathematics and languages. And so our teachers have to have online training, and they have to have this extreme passion for teaching. So we do have an oversupply of teachers, but the best thing about Kidato is that we pay more as well to teachers than a traditional brick and mortar school. Of course, we do not have the brick and mortar overheads. So our revenue is literally split between ourselves and the teachers in a sense. And our teachers also work less hours. They work 6 hours instead of 10 hours because we remove commute and other administrative tasks that teachers are usually given in traditional brick and mortar schools. They don't have to do that. So they work between 5 to 6 hours on a given day when they're fully engaged, giving them a lot of opportunities to upskill themselves, go back to university, or find other sources of revenue, which they can still do on Kidato by offering after-school classes.
Now that you've come off your seed funding round, $1.4 million raised, what's next for Kidato in 2021 in terms of the product offering that's available and also scaling up its reach across the world?
So right now we're just pumping more of our resources into building the product, moving it from a minimum viable product to our core product, which should happen in the next 3 months. We'll be doing another launch. We're also looking at partnerships with Ivy League universities and local universities to create a pipeline for our high school students to some of these universities. We are looking at accreditation internationally and locally, just working with different government bodies at this particular point. We are looking at expansion into the East African market. We have a lot of interest from Tanzania right now, some interest from Uganda as well. We are looking at just sort of an East African expansion at this particular point on our academic side, and on our after school side, it's completely open towards students from across the world.
Now onto a series on global warming called Surviving Climate Change. As a species, we've long been digging and indeed getting into a nasty hole that will be rather hard to get out of. After years and years of destruction and unfair treatment, Mother Nature is now fighting back. The net result is the deaths or the displacement of hundreds, if not millions of people around the world. food shortages and climate-related conflict. In our first episode of Surviving Climate Change, CGTN's Lindim Tongana sets the pace by unpacking the realities of our changing climate.
It hurts.
Global warming, climate change and conservation, words that are more often said than acted upon by governments and leaders of the world. The truth is, climate change has been brought about by the greed that favors few but affects us all, and not just humans, the entire planet. If wild animals and plants had an enemy, it would probably be us humans. We need only look at the ways in which we've ravaged the earth to understand why. Here's some facts to help put this into perspective. Over the last century, the planet has warmed at a rate of 1 degree Celsius a year. Hard to notice as we go about our day-to-day lives, but over the past 5 years, temperatures have risen at record levels. The whole situation is linked to 3 human activities: the burning of fossil fuels, intensive farming, especially for meat and crop production, and deforestation. Here in Africa, extreme weather patterns are already wreaking havoc in many nations. In 2019 and much of 2020, parts of East and West Africa were hit by floods, leaving a trail of death and destruction. The region is also recovering from 2 devastating cyclones, which resulted in deaths and the displacement of thousands. The cyclones also destroyed crop production, leaving aid agencies to respond to multiple humanitarian crises.
The scars of Cyclone Idai are visible. However, authorities and aid workers believe that they have the cholera outbreak under control.
A desert locust invasion that started in the Horn of Africa has added to the region's woes. Crops that were planted by smallholder farmers have been destroyed by the pests. Meanwhile, weather experts have been predicting a drought on the heels of these floods. It seems when it rains, it pours in Africa. Even sunny spells are no longer normal. They're often searingly hot and accompanied by food and water shortages. This is climate change at play, and it's not just Africa. Asia, the Americas, and Europe have all found themselves at the deep end of climate change. Cyclones, heat waves, fires, and heavy rains are all becoming increasingly common. According to German infographics firm Statista, countries like China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India are among the world's most polluted. However, countries like Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Estonia are those considered least polluted. Here in Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Egypt are among those whose pollution levels are most worrying. Although there have been efforts to contain the situation, lack of cooperation is seen as the biggest impediment. Some conservationists see climate conferences as little more than talk shops, all heat but no fire.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change has already started and it's killing us.
While grandstanding marks this debate, coral reefs are disappearing and glaciers are melting, leading to rising sea levels. Despite Africa contributing the least to the world's greenhouse gas emissions, the continent is feeling the heat. Food production is being compromised as populations continue to expand. Forests are being cleared to create habitats, which feeds into an already complicated situation. This is conflict. For a long time, the Sahel region was a bedrock of symbiotic coexistence between herders and farmers. Farmers would allow their nomadic brothers and sisters to graze their livestock on their land and fertilize it for the next growing season. But years of unfavorable weather patterns led to cycles of poor harvests. With dwindling food production, a conflict ensued. This is what has been exploited by Al-Qaeda and ISIL to create a potent security threat. This has already claimed a regime in Mali and has influenced election outcomes in countries like Nigeria and Guinea-Bissau. We could list more and more climate change-related cases and incidents. However, this boils down to individuals and governments. Climate change poses a serious threat to the fundamental rights for all. It affects our access to food, to health, and compromises our quality of life for individuals and communities. It is thus our individual, national, and international responsibility to care for nature for us and future generations. The late Nobel laureate Professor Wangari Maathai once said, "Mother Nature is very generous, but also very unforgiving." The reality is, if you destroy nature, nature could destroy you. If we are not careful enough and responsible, this could be practical in our lifetime. It would appear it has already started happening.
It's 18:35, you're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. The WTO and the US start talks on intellectual property issues, stopping wider production of desperately needed COVID vaccines. And top diplomats from the United States and South Korea holds talks in London ahead of the G7 meeting.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour, starting in Africa's largest copper producer, the DR Congo. 3 months after declaring a resurgence of the Ebola virus, the country has now announced the end of the most recent outbreak. At least 6 people are reported to have died of Ebola after an outbreak was reported in North Kivu province. That outbreak marked the country's 3rd in less than a year. According to the World Health Organization and UNICEF, a quick response by authorities and partners enabled the DRC to contain this most recent of outbreaks. In Nigeria, the police forces reportedly deployed officers on horses and motorcycles in the capital, Abuja. That's amid reports that Boko Haram militants are planning to carry out attacks in the country's capital. In a statement cited by a local newspaper, the police force says that the deployment is meant for intelligence gathering. And Egypt's parliament has passed a law that increases penalties and jail sentences for people found guilty of bullying people with disabilities. Violators will now face at least 2 years behind bars. They could pay up to $13,000 in fines as well. The move has been welcomed by Egyptian human rights groups and persons with disabilities. That's a run through your headlines. The United States' top trade negotiator will start talks with the World Trade Organization on ways to overcome intellectual property issues. They're keeping critically needed COVID-19 vaccines from being distributed at a much greater scale. The White House has come under pressure from lawmakers at home and governments abroad to join in efforts to waive these IP rules for the vaccine so that poorer countries can start to produce their own generic versions of the shots they need to vaccinate their populations. at a large scale. Now, the US has been criticized for focusing first on vaccinating Americans, particularly as its vaccine supply is not only outpacing demand, but doses approved for use elsewhere, like the vaccine developed by teams at Oxford and AstraZeneca, are not in the US, are just sitting idle in that particular country. Let's dive into the details of this story. John Terry joins me now live from New York with more data here. So, John, what sort of compromise is a US trade representative likely to be pushing for in her talks at the WTO?
Well, I should say, first of all, by the way, that there is a huge stockpile of the AstraZeneca vaccine in the United States. It has not been approved for use here, and I know that they're planning to send that to India as fast as they can. So the AstraZeneca vaccine that we have, not approved for emergency use, at least is not going to be wasted. That much I think we can say. Let me quote you Ron Klain, okay? He's a White House official. He's been speaking to CBS News within the last 24-hour news cycle. He says that the U.S. trade representative, who is Catherine Tai these days, is going to meet with the World Trade Organization, we think sometime in the coming week. And he said it'll be to work out how we can get this vaccine more widely distributed, more widely licensed, and more widely shared. And I think that the key word there is probably not only shared, but probably licensed. I think that's probably the watchword. The White House has yet to comment formally on any of this. It's known that Mr. Biden, who has reacted swiftly to the crisis in India, is keen to help countries overseas any way that he can, but no official comment yet. However, Jen Psaki, who is the White House spokesperson, has said within the last handful of days that there are many ways that you can get greater distribution of these vaccines from America overseas. Now, the notion of giving up your patent or your intellectual property, I have to say, I think that's a bit of a no-no. It's a bit of a non-starter. I think that increasing cooperation between drug companies all over the world so that companies outside the United States can be licensed to make the vaccines and have the key ingredients of the recipe sent to them so that they can put it together locally. I think that's much more what the trade representative is likely to be pushing for. And I think that that is almost certainly going to be the way they go, pushing aside the notion of actually giving away any business secrets, as it were. Of course, one day there will be generic drugs that help people who have the COVID-19 disease, but not yet.
Right, so South Africa and India, we'll get to the IP argument in a moment, but South Africa and India have been pushing very hard for a waiver, a time-bound waiver, if I remember the statements from their representatives at the WTO correctly, on IP related to these vaccines for months now. But the US and the EU have been largely opposed to that. Walk us through their arguments why.
Yes. Well, I think it's a developing nation thing versus a developed nation thing. It's as simple as that. I mean, patents and intellectual property, I mean, they are just simply fundamental to any business here in North America and also in the European Union, and particularly when it comes to the idea of manufacturing drugs. I mean, the costs of manufacturing drugs, first of all, it's a huge expense. It takes many, many years. Remember, the Pfizer vaccine, I think, that we're now seeing around the world was developed many years ago, and they had it on the shelf. They brought it out for this particular disease. And I think even in a crisis which we're in, all of us in this world, the notion, if you are a major drug corporation, of giving your hand away completely to potential competitors at this stage is really a bit tough for them to take on board. Remember, patents last a lifetime, and they also form the fundamental basis for the pipeline of new drugs that you will bring through in years to come. So I think it's very much a Western business cultural thing as much as anything else.
Indeed, we did have a roughly comparable fight, though, with intellectual property around antiretrovirals dealing with HIV and AIDS pandemic. And it's pretty clear in this case that unless COVID is crushed everywhere around the world, it'll still be a deep problem for everyone. Leaders in the West admit as much. So how are they rationalizing this idea of their opposition to an IP waiver that will allow production to take place in other parts of the world?
Yeah, it's true. The antiretroviral drug story and this one are looking likely as if they're going to be very, very similar. I mean, it's very, very tough, as I said just now. You know, we're all in this together, but you know, I mean, that was a very good question that you posed, but you also know that this is not the way the world is. This is not the way life goes. And these companies face enormous commercial and diplomatic pressure. They've got shareholders that they have to appease. And if you're, you know, dealing with one country that you don't particularly like who it's also dealing with, these are issues that are unseen, hidden barriers that we, you know, rarely get a glimpse of, as you know. Now, Gavi and COVAX, which is the framework, these two organizations in Geneva, the framework for getting these drugs out of the major developed nations into the international arena. Gavi says that in developed nations like this one, 30% of the population has been vaccinated pretty roughly so far, and that's certainly true here. In low-income nations like in Africa, it's 0.2%. Now, France and Spain and New Zealand and Sweden and, of course, the United States are stepping up to the plate at the moment. Many African countries, I think, are being left behind. And Gavi says that none of us can relax on this issue until everybody in the world, including Africa, who wants to have a vaccine has actually got one.
Indeed. Let's see how those talks do play out in Geneva. John Turrett in New York. Thank you. Now let's turn our attention over to Europe. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the South Korean Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong have held talks in London. Blinken also met with the Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi earlier today. The meetings come ahead of a three-day summit of foreign ministers from the group of 7 countries. The gathering aims to prepare the groundwork for a G7 summit of leaders in southwest England sometime next month. Finance ministers and central bank governors from China, Japan and South Korea have vowed on Monday to strengthen cooperation amongst themselves. In a joint statement after a virtual meeting on the sidelines of the Asian Development Bank's annual meetings, they committed themselves to providing the necessary support by providing what they described as targeted measures to economies hurt by the COVID-19 pandemic. Officials have pledged to achieve inclusive recovery, preserve long-term fiscal sustainability and maintain financial stability too. They say the regional outlook has improved and they will explore new initiatives to strengthen the ASEAN +3 regional financial safety net. Back into the world of cryptocurrencies and their underlying tech, industries like the services sector have been hit very, very hard. But at least one segment of the economy is poised for a bit more growth, anything related to blockchain. It has created lots of job opportunities and even better pay for young people, as Jiang Xishuan finds out on what's hot tonight.
With a few speedy movements of the cursor, a smart contract is being built into a blockchain. Projects like these are what 31-year-old Gen Qiangle has been working on for around a year. He started to study blockchain technology some 3 years ago, when he was at a cloud computing firm.
I started to pay attention to blockchain technology in 2017. More people were talking about it, and I found out that the idea and the technology really captured my attention. And China listed the technology as an emerging area at the end of 2016. So it's supported by the government, as well as attracting my interest.
Gen says his blockchain abilities have boosted his salary by 30%. The same is true of his 60 colleagues working at this Shanghai-based tech service provider, who've all picked up their knowledge of blockchains and how to use them.
Since China started to promote blockchain technology in the new infrastructure last year, many startups and large companies in the field, and even companies in traditional industries, have been expanding their blockchain business. And there are far from enough professionals, so the competition is tough. While large companies have kept their salary offers stable, some others have doubled their salary offers.
Zhang says that as his company is seeking to further commercialize its technology services, it's now looking for professionals who not only know the new technologies like blockchain and the Internet of Things, but also know about specific business sectors like retail or food safety. The company has already hired almost 20 new employees so far this year, and plans to double or even triple that in the future. The demand is huge. Consulting firm Gartner estimates China is facing a talent gap of more than 750,000 people in blockchain technology. and college students are responding. Qian Yuhan had originally been studying electronics, but is now studying blockchain technology in her graduate sophomore year. Almost 20% of her undergraduate classmates have done the same thing.
Blockchain was just becoming well known when I got my bachelor's degree. It's now being applied to a wider range of sectors, from just cryptocurrency in the beginning, but now to finance and to the whole of society. It has a very promising future.
Some 30 students like Qin have joined the university's lab specifically teaching the new technology. The university began offering blockchain courses as add-ons to regular computer science classes for postgraduate students in 2016, and has now expanded the offering, opening a class here for undergraduate students not majoring in the computer sciences at all.
We plan to make our courses a MOOC, open to all college students in Shanghai. And we have also established a virtual blockchain operation platform where students can program, create blockchains, and do experiments. It has already become a city-level project. It will be free to all students in Shanghai and even to the whole country.
A report by internet data collector Hulian Maibo and recruitment site Liepin says that 33 Chinese colleges have opened courses or majors related to blockchains. The hope is that with college education including more courses teaching blockchain, many fields nationwide will be able to begin using the new technology. Zhang Shishen, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
So then, into commodity prices. Brent crude, it's back to levels really that we last saw in early March, with the July contract going as high as $67.80 a barrel today. Last week, as you might recall, OPEC Plus did agree to keep output pretty much unchanged. A big chunk of the production cuts among OPEC, of course, were from Saudi Arabia, its largest single producer. The IMF is expecting the petrostate's economic output to contract this year by at least half a percentage point compared to last year's contraction of nearly 7%. According to the IMF, the break-even oil price for the kingdom is roughly $76 a barrel. That's about 12% or so above where Brent is at the moment. Here's what's coming up next. We'll tell you the story of some young people in Nigeria tapping into the lucrative but rare business of strawberry farming.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. One last story for you in the hours. This one from Nigeria. Strawberry farming over there is currently an untapped gold mine. The fruit's cultivation is mostly carried out in the north-central state of Plateau due to the state's relatively cold climate. On Grassroots tonight, we explore how more and more young Nigerians are turning to strawberry farming as a viable source of income amidst rising unemployment that currently stands at 33%. With that report, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
Theophilus Twamian, harvesting the last batch of strawberries at the tail end of its planting season. The 45-year-old was seeking to augment his monthly income 4 years ago and found strawberry farming a lucrative business. The fruit is in high demand here in Nigeria. Theophilus harvests more than 60 kilograms of strawberries weekly. 1 kilogram sells for about $3. So he rakes in an average $180 weekly.
Strawberry has helped me in many ways. One, it has helped me to pay my children's school fees. That helped me to manage my family also. Because of this strawberry that I've been farming, I don't touch my salary again. I use the money of strawberry to feed my family, to train my children, to pay their school fees.
Strawberry farming is fast gaining traction in Nigeria. Aside being eaten fresh, it's also used as raw materials for food production. Farmers here require only a small portion of land, which makes it easy for many young farmers like Theophilus to cultivate. But experts say there's a much bigger earning potential yet to be harnessed.
There's a huge market for it, and we have opportunity to create more awareness about the strawberry crop and its potential, the value chain, the whole strawberry value chain, which would readily be embraced by young people who need little or minimal guidance to go into the local production. The potential for job creation is huge. It also begs for public-private collaboration in adaptation.
But a greater percentage of the harvests go to waste due to weak preservation capacity for agricultural produce.
The reason why we still have 60% post-harvest loss annually in Nigeria is the reason why we have a growing rate of unemployment, because the solution to that post-harvest loss is the jobs that are not created, So once you open up the post-harvest sector as an industry that has potential.
Reports from the Bureau of Statistics show that 33.3% of Nigeria's working population are unemployed. But with strawberry farming, more young Nigerians are able to beat the unemployment challenge. A further expansion of the production chain would open up a vista of opportunities in the subsector that could further close the unemployment gap. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Play 2, Nigeria.
All right, then a wrap up with the currencies. There's not much of a change among the currencies we do track on the program here. The Naira is still flirting around the 4.9, 4.10 level. The Kenyan shilling still under 108. And of course, the South African rand around 14.39, 14.40. Some macro data for you, however, from East Africa. Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan will be in Kenya from the 4th of May for a 2-day state visit that includes an address to both houses of parliament. The country is one of the top 3 export destinations for Kenya, but trade and policy ties were pretty frosty and somewhat unpredictable under her predecessor, John Pombe Magufuli. We'll keep you posted, of course, on any trade policy changes that do come up in the next 48 hours from this corner of East Africa. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The world today is up next from Washington, D.C.